Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord, for they shall rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. These words are ascribed to the Apostle John, who is imprisoned for his faith in Jesus Christ. He wrote to encourage and to inspire God's servant church in a time of grief and suffering and sorrow. Now, St. John's is a servant church. For more than 50 years, Martha was an exemplary servant of St. John's. Although we will share some stories today, although we will read some words from her family, although we will hear Brian speak of his mother, there is no way to recount all the stories of people blessed or ministries strengthened by sweet Martha. We cannot tell every story of how she was formed as the sister of three brothers, two more than a decade older than she, and then Don, 3 years younger. We cannot tell all the ways Martha touched the lives of Brian, Scott, Les and Lynn, Heather and Joanna and Will, Barb and Kevin, and Rebecca. We cannot recount all the ways Martha shaped the faith of her sisters in the Joy class or other groups in the church. We cannot emphasize enough all the happiness she felt at high school reunions in Hendersonville or gatherings of the North Carolina Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. We cannot gather all the stories of how she inspired her neighbors, her co-workers at the bank, teachers and administrators through her service in PTA. We cannot name all the times her smile and greeting welcomed people entering the doors of these buildings for a support group with NAMI. We cannot capture all the ways she blessed people through Baptist Peace Fellowship, RAIN, Friendship Trays, or Women of the Church. We cannot capture all the ways Martha's life was formed by her mother's death while Martha was attending Mars Hill College, or her loving 27-year marriage to Ray and her sorrow at his death from cancer. Nor can we repeat all the ways her almost 30 years loving marriage to Tom Bryson provided another partnership of service to the world. We cannot fully impress upon you how many people witnessed her humility, her goodness, kindness, peace, gentleness, honesty, compassion, thoughtfulness, wisdom, insight, and capacity to see the best in another person as she invested her life in God's redemptive vision, always lifting those who had fallen. On that Sunday morning, when we heard of Martha's passing on ahead of us, I was already downstairs that morning. I'd been exchanging emails for a while and sharing phone calls with a few. Paula came downstairs and I told her how our Sunday was beginning. We were quiet for a few minutes, and then Paula said, "You know, whenever I think of Martha, I think of a gentle breeze." What I can tell you today is how Martha and Ray held hands sitting in these pews, even in worship in this sanctuary every Sunday. And I can tell you how a fella named Tom Bryson noticed them holding hands from his chancel choir chair. And he sat there for many years wondering why every marriage could not express that same love. And I can tell you how Martha and Tom came to be known as the hands-holding couple at Aldersgate over the past 18 months. Would you please pray with me? Living God, thank you for Martha Bryson's life. Thank you that she showed us what happens in a life when a person holds hands with your Spirit. Amen.
From Proverbs. A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a downcast spirit dries up the bones. As Dennis has mentioned, Martha did experience the ups and downs in life like many of us do. Perhaps she had a couple more untimely deaths than many of us often have. As was mentioned, her mother passed on while she was still in school, and yet her father got remarried and had a good second marriage. And then when Ray died at a fairly early age, Martha had the perspective and the attitude to say, I have my father and stepmother Phyllis to look at to see that I can live and be happy again. And she was. She found Tom, and she and Tom had over 29 years of a close, loving relationship of marriage. As it mentioned, Martha was consistently cheerful and encouraging in her interactions with other people. Martha never wanted to hurt anyone. She liked to have fun, and she did so in her Joy Sunday School class beach and mountain trips. And there's the Joy class over there. Martha never was all that good and very apologetic when she played the game Aggravation. The point of Aggravation was, as you were playing it, you wanted to get to the end and you wanted to aggravate people by sending them back to the beginning. Martha didn't like to do this to other people, and she was very apologetic about it. However, when they started to play Buzzword, this was a game where you worked with teammates trying to get them to say a list of words. And when she was encouraging her teammates, then she got really competitive, and she really got into that game. Martha had a good sense of humor. On one of these trips, she made a pot of coffee that went all over the floor. And then she made another pot of coffee that went out all over the floor. And it seems that if you will flip-flop the carafes that the coffee belongs in, they will not go in and they will go all over the floor. So finally we got a pot of coffee was made that worked, and then they were so congratulatory, she got a big hug from Margaret Falls with a cup of coffee in her hand, and it spilled down her back. But Martha just took that in stride, and she was fine with that. She was also fine and thought it was funny that at her second bridal shower before marrying Tom in 1993, they got her a red bikini, and she thought that was great. And so she laughed with him. I believe she wore it. She said she wore it. I believe she did wear it. So more about Martha from Proverbs. Proverbs 17:17. A friend loves at all times, and kinfolks are born to share adversity. In Proverbs 18:24. Some friends play at friendship, but a true friend sticks closer than one's nearest kin. The one thing, when I talk to people in the Joy class and the Didymus class about Martha, the one thing that was, I think, said by every single person in one way, shape, or form was Martha was a caring friend. Everybody said that. Among Martha's list of longtime friends is Ethel Harris. And if you go to St. John's, you might be aware that back in 2016 and 17, Ethel had some really serious medical complications related to her intestines. Her life was in real danger. She didn't know if she was going to make it. She had one last medical place that she could turn to for help, and this was the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. When Ethel scheduled to do her initial consultation, Martha came up to Ethel and said, Tom and I are going with you to Minnesota. Ethel said, that's too much. You can't do that. And Martha said, oh, yes, we can. Ethel said, I can never pay you back. Martha, you don't have to. It's not a payback thing. So Tom and Martha were there when Ethel heard the good news that the Mayo Clinic thought they could help her, and Tom or Martha were there when Ethel went back a month later and had successful surgery. Not many people tell Ethel Harris how it's going to be, but Martha did so. And while Martha said it wasn't payback, there is a story. The first date between Tom and Martha had an extra ticket to the Hornets game, and she said, Ethel, do you think it would be okay if I invited Tom to the Hornets game? And Ethel said, yes, I do. And so that actually led to their first date. from the New Testament, the letter to the Ephesians, and this was underlined and starred in Martha's Bible. For this reason, I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth takes its name. I pray that, according to the riches of his glory, he may grant that you may be strengthened in your inner being with power through his Spirit, and that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, as you are being rooted and grounded in love. I pray that you may have the power to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and the length and the height and the depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, so that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. And one verse from Hebrews that reminded me of Martha. Because Jesus himself was tested by what he suffered, he's able to help those who are being tested. Well, Martha did know and receive strength from God. She knew about the breadth and length and the height and depth of the love of Christ. And like Jesus, she was able to use the hurts that she experienced and to help them with others dealing with those situations in their lives. When someone entered their Sunday school class who had lost their husband, Martha knew what it was like to lose a husband, and she knew how to be present for that person. When Martha was writing or speaking to someone who was experiencing a difficult situation, and sometimes normal situations, she would often end by saying, "You know that I love you." Martha was a great friend and example to her peers. Yet Martha also spent a period of time with Kathy Hartzell teaching an older woman's class. She also taught younger girls with Sue Veach and Joy Jarrett. But mainly, what Martha taught us was how to stay positive in difficult situations, how to be a true friend, and how to be a supportive presence to other people. She knew how to turn to God to renew her strength and to give that strength to other people. And as we consider her lives, may we find ways to do the same.
Foremost, for myself and my family, I want to thank each of you for making time to be here today. Martha Bryson, Martha Ann, Marty, sister, grandma, aunt, friend, mother. These are the dear names by which we knew her. Mother was born in Hendersonville amidst the beauty of Blue Ridge Mountains in 1941. She was the third born of four and her parents' only daughter. My father used to joke that he and she were both the third of four boys. He was Irish and not so good with the jokes. In his family history book, my Uncle Don writes of their parents. Despite raising a family in the years of World War II, their parents' discussions and memories never centered on hardships, but rather on all the blessings and good that befell them. Born on Friday, February 13th, Mother learned early and always to see the good in everything and in everyone. Contrary to popular superstition, she said that she considered Friday the 13th quite lucky indeed, illustrating the characteristic trait of always looking to find the best in every situation, every person, everything. Faith, family, friends, and flowers, these were the things that Mother held most important and dear throughout her life. And these were the things that brought her comfort in times of sorrow and joy in times of celebration. These were the things around which she centered her life. Her faith was central and true and clear. She often spoke of her own father and mother forming her, along with the Reverend and Mrs. T.G. Proctor and other family and friends at their church in Hendersonville, Shaw's Creek. Her father, for a time, directed the choir, and she recalled once being asked to fill on the organ, which Noel can attest is not quite like playing the piano. She said that request was a one-time performance only. Mother married my father in 1963. This was the beginning of 27 years together that brought me and my brother Scott into the world. I was born in Augusta and Scott in Charlotte, just across the street at a hospital then known as Presbyterian. I will apologize to our Baptist friends, but Scott often held that he was Presbyterian by birth. Charlotte and St. John's were Mother's home for 54 years, albeit with regular escapes to the mountains and the occasional trip to the beach. She patiently taught us, Scott and me, the faith as it had been given to her. I recall once asking, why do we call it Good Friday when they killed Jesus? While folding laundry, she explained with patience and love, and in a way a 6-year-old could understand, that it was not good for Jesus, it was good for you and me. For God sent the Son into the world, not to condemn the world, but that the world might be saved through him, which you'll recognize as John 3:17. If you have lost a parent, you will appreciate there are so very many stories that can be told. Respect for time constrains me, but I know each of us will hold memories. There may be among us former third graders or senior adults whom she taught in Sunday school. Each lesson was prepared with diligence in sharing the faith she held. There may be among us ladies whom she traveled with on Sunday school or WMU retreats, time she used to refresh and learned and that she treasured. There are among us family members who will recall the many pound cakes, hams, 7-bean salads, and other dishes, all prepared and served with love at picnics and family gatherings. There were, of course, challenges. My father passed age 50 after a 10-year battle with cancer. Through the love of family and good friends, Mother was supported, and she was not called to spend life as a widow. After a time, as you heard before, she married Tom Bryson and doubled the size of our family, adding 2 wonderful daughters and sisters, Joanna and Barb, all without changing a single diaper. This October, Tom and Mother would have celebrated the joy and happiness that 30 years of marriage brought. In January, Joanna returned from Germany, and Barb's daughter, Rebecca, came from Illinois, and we were able to gather for a time over the Martin Luther King weekend. In what would be my last call with Mother, she spoke of all that time together and that week as being so enjoyable for her. Throughout their life together, I think Mother and Tom have lived the prayer that concludes the St. John's Covenant. Guide us as we try to do that which pleases Thee. Volunteering to deliver meals on wheels, teaching Sunday school and tending the nursery, visiting the sick, and aiding the poor. These are their example and the memory that I hold dear. I noted earlier, Mother loved people and time shared, and flowers. She saw beauty in all things. There was that rare occasion when she and Tom missed being here on an Easter day to share it with Les and me on a trip to New York. We went to service at St. Thomas Church, Fifth Avenue. While there are many things there that can make an impression, music, ceremony, architecture, the thing that struck her most was the mix of people. There was the expected ladies in hats and gentlemen in suits, but there were also tourists in blue jeans, student with backpacks, probably a few homeless men among us, all gathered to celebrate the joy of Easter. Red and yellow, black and white, as she taught me to sing when I was a child, all are precious in His sight. Our niece Rachel, talking with her husband and young daughters on the trip from our home to theirs after Thanksgiving dinner this past fall, reported that they stumbled on a question in response to being asked whether the girls were on their best behavior. What would Miss Martha do? A worthy question indeed. I think she would continue to love us, to pray for us, and to serve us as she did all of her life. I am grateful for all of the love, patience, and kindness my mother offered to me. She was a living example of the words of St. Paul: love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. Recently, Mother had begun to experience some short-term memory loss. Still, those things that she learned early and held on to forever were very much at the ready and available to call upon. That is, the scripture she had learned by heart was always at her command. I found that reassuring and comforting. So now, in the words that she taught me and that were most familiar to her, I ask you to join in reciting the 23rd Psalm, which is printed in your service bulletin. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Why should I feel discouraged? And why should the shadows come? Why should my heart be lonely and long for heaven and home, when Jesus is my portion, my constant friend is He. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. God's eyes on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. Well, I sing because I'm happy, and I sing because I'm free, for His eyes on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. So let not your hearts be troubled. His tender words I hear, and resting on God's goodness, I lose my doubts and all fears, though by my path He leadeth. But one step I may see, God's eyes on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. His eyes on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. Sing with me if you know it. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. His eyes on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. One more time I sing. I sing because I'm happy, and we sing because we're free, for His eyes on the sparrow, and I know He watches me.
Would you pray with me? Living God, thank you for watching and watching over and watching out for protecting. Amen. For people like Martha, duct tape is your friend. The scriptures we have read this morning, Lee has already read some, and I'm going to refer to some in my words. Every one of these passages are underlined in here. If you don't have a beat-up Bible, and you suggest that you are a follower of Jesus, you need to rethink part of that. Because if you're a follower of Jesus, you should have at least one beat-up Bible. Our world is experiencing some shortages. Have you heard? Due to the pandemic and supply chain interruptions, we're lacking some pharmaceuticals, and some microchips, some lithium for batteries, food products like romaine lettuce. Gathered in this sacred space, celebrating the life of ministry of Martha Bryson reminds us of another shortage. Our world is short on the fruit of the Spirit. We find this discussed in Galatians. One reason we already miss Martha is because we feel the supply chain interrupted on love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and generosity, faithfulness and gentleness and self-control. Martha showed us what happens in the life of the world when one individual bears the fruit of the Spirit. Like a couple of weeks ago, we sat down with Tom and said, so how many do you think we'll need to sit with the family? And he said 18 to 20. Where'd y'all come from? When you're like Martha, your family's a lot larger than some folks might count by thinking. The family's all of you, all of us. You see, Martha belonged to Christ. She lived by the Spirit. And as it says here in this passage in Galatians, when you live by the Spirit, you should keep in step with the Spirit. Martha kept in step with the Spirit. She was never conceited. She never competed against others unless it was some games. By the way, did you know that on the night of Martha's passing, she had spent some time, as I understand, whooping up on her family in cards, right? And sent them home like they were visitors, not guests, right? And then she and Tom started ending the day and making preparations. And Martha, being Martha, decided that her plants needed a drink before bed. And so she took her little watering pitcher and she went around from plant to plant giving a drink. And sometime during that time, she stepped on. Isn't that just like Martha? To have a good time with family and then tend to living things just before she goes. Martha exemplified the forgiving life. When she knew of a person who was found in a transgression, she sought to restore them to God's peace in a spirit of gentleness. She was an expert in bearing the burdens of others. We were nourished because Martha shared with us the fruit of the Spirit. There is one person here today who knew Martha for almost 80 years, her brother Don. Listen to his words of witness to his beloved sister, 3 years older, Marty. My sister Martha, Marty, was 3 years older and much wiser than me. We grew up in a loving Christian home with parents who taught us at an early age the importance of believing in Jesus Christ, reading our Bible, and praying. This foundation has served us well, and my sister grew into one of the most devoted, loving, and generous Christians I've ever known. Throughout our school years, Martha and I went to public schools, most of which were fairly small compared to today's huge elementary and high schools. Martha had preceded me in most of my classes, so when I came along, the teachers always asked, "Are you Martha Nanny's brother?" And of course, I could always reply in the affirmative, since I knew Marty had been an exemplary student and had set a high bar for me to follow. In addition to our parents, Martha had a deep love for her two grandmothers. Each of them had lost their husbands early in life, so Martha and I never knew our grandfathers. Our grandmothers would spend time with each family through the year, rotating between their other children. Martha would often cuddle up with a grandmother while she was reading a book to her. And on occasion, Martha would get to sleep in the same bed with her maternal grandmother, and she once wrote in a family journal, "Snuggling up to Mama Anders on a cold wintry night with the rain drumming on our tin roof made the world of a preschooler seem as safe as heaven itself." Our mom died in 1960. Martha was in her freshman year at Mars Hill College. I was a sophomore in high school. Mom's death was devastating to our family unit. She'd always been the stalwart homemaker and mother. The void was extreme. Martha elected to leave college and come home, attempting to stabilize our lives. Although our mother was an excellent cook, Martha had not taken lessons in how to cook for a family. She was a trooper, though, and dug out our mom's recipes and received guidance from many family members. She quickly learned what holding a family together was all about, and we all survived by doing our part. As adults, Martha and I became even closer as siblings. We often chatted on the phone for an hour, reminiscing about our lives and our children, catching up on our latest travels, current events, and family news. We always arranged to see each other whenever possible, and we never ended a conversation until Martha asked the question, "Well, when are you and Margaret coming to see us?" Our conversations always ended with, "Love you, Don," and my reply, "Love you too, Marty." Thank you, Don. Well, we're experiencing another shortage today. Spiritually positive people who invest their thinking in the way of Jesus. We're taught this in a passage that Martha underlined in Philippians. Brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Beloved, Martha invested her thinking in the way of Jesus. We learned from her. We heard her words, we saw her actions motivated by this thinking. If we invest our thinking in the way of Jesus, we too will experience and express the peace of God's presence. There's another person here who's known her for quite a while. Margaret has asked that I not say how long. But Margaret's known her for almost 60 years, just about all of your life, right? Martha's sister-in-law, Margaret, experienced this spirituality of thinking in Martha. Margaret writes, "I was an only child, and I'd always longed for a sibling, especially a sister. And I received that sister when I married Martha's youngest brother, Don, in 1966. Marty and I soon became dear friends and sisters in love, a love that grew over the years. We wrote letters to each other, telling about current happenings, sharing recipes, describing our children's recent achievements. Of course, we visited many times during the years of her first marriage to Ray, and over the years we shared late night talks and cooked meals together and planned family get-togethers. Marty was all about experiencing the joy of life. Martha showed us all how to live a Christian life. She loved everyone she met. She loved and prayed for every niece, nephew, cousin, aunt, brother, and wife, and the parents and relatives of all her in-laws. She loved all of her siblings, spouses, and children, and when she and Tom married, she accepted his daughters and their husbands and families as her own. She loved and was interested in their lives and activities, and she always had time to listen to her family and rejoice in their successes, crying with them in sad times. When our youngest son was tragically killed in an automobile accident, she rushed to be with us, and our older son to love on us, to pray with us, to encourage us in countless ways. To know Marty was to learn how she loved nature in all its forms. Almost nothing pleased her more than a drive on the Blue Ridge Parkway. We once took a trip to drive the length of the parkway, and Marty oohed and ahed every mile. You can just see her. The joy of seeing her amazement as we showed to her the Canadian Rockies was something I will always remember. Of course, every flower was a wonder of God's creation to her. I'm very grateful that God blessed me with this beautiful Christian woman to be my sister and example. Thank you, Margaret. Well, of course, the primary shortage in today's world is love for one another. Because Martha was passed on to us, she's passed on ahead of us, we now need to do our part to re-strengthen this supply chain. After all, We have all learned the strength of a supply chain is only as strong as the weakest link. So don't be the weak link. Imagine Martha reading these words to us from 1 John, from this Bible. Beloved, let us love one another, because love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love. God's love was revealed among us in this way. God sent his only Son into the world so that we might live through him. Beloved, since God loved us so much, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God abides in us, and his love is perfected in us. By this we know that we abide in God and God in us, because God has given us the Spirit. We love because God first loved us. Those who say, I love God, and then hate a brother or a sister are liars. For those who do not love a brother or a sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. The commandment we have from God is this: those who love God must love their brothers and sisters also. Although each of us experienced God's love through Martha, Candy Elmore, Martha's first niece, has many fond memories of her sweet Aunt Mary. Martha was only 12 years old when Candy was born. Martha became a role model for her first niece. And when Martha and Ray were dating, they allowed Candy to go along with them. I bet that was fun for them. Martha always made her feel loved. And Candy wrote, Aunt Marty was the most thoughtful and kind person I've ever known. Well, you've heard from Brian. He and Scott experienced their mother's love their entire lives. A few years after Ray's death, Martha and Tom married. And Martha welcomed Tom's daughters, Barb and Joanna, into her circle of maternal love. Barb and her husband, Kevin, were with Tom and Martha on that night getting beat at cards. Barb says that having Marty as a mother for almost 30 years was a privilege, a blessing. And from the day they met her, Martha loved them unconditionally. She was easy to talk to, laugh with, and cry with. Martha was a role model for them, genuinely kind and friendly to everyone, always making sure everyone felt included. Joanna echoes these thoughts and emphasizes how important it was to see how Marty loved their father. They truly nurtured one another for these past 3 decades. They defended and protected one another. Together they loved their neighbors, their church, their many friends and strangers in need. They showed how great love can enable great works. Both Barb and Joanna feel blessed to have been